Hello, and welcome to this special edition of Almanac North. I'm Aaron Brown, host of tonight's Core Conversation on Mining. I'm an author, columnist, and college instructor in Hibbing. I live in the woods north of the Western Mesabi Iron Range and drive by 2 mines every day on my way to work. Core Conversations is a quarterly look at some of the big issues in our region, an effort to dig a little deeper and educate viewers on these issues. Tonight, our focus is on mining, and specifically what the future might look like for both ferrous and non-ferrous mining in northern Minnesota. Whether you support mining, are against mining, or sit somewhere in the middle, tonight's broadcast will offer you something to think about. We will begin with iron mining. The iron industry has seen constant evolution over the past century, from nearly pure hematite ore to modern taconite pellets. Mining companies are always on the lookout for what is next to keep them competitive on the world market. Producer Megan McGarvey and videographer Thomas Soderberg spent time at 2 iron mines recently. They learned about new value-added product innovations and what this could mean for the future of mining in Minnesota.
We are the starting point to the steelmaking process. Without our Iron Range operations, you wouldn't have the steel that you need for your car, your washer and dryer, your refrigerator, things that we use in everyday life. So iron is absolutely essential to how we live our lives, and the Iron Range is the first stop on that whole process.
Minnesota's taconite industry is the child of necessity and invention. Before taconite came rich natural iron ore discovered in 3 distinct ranges: the Vermilion, the Mesabi, and the Cuyuna. By the end of World War II, Minnesota's natural high-grade ores were nearly gone. The mining companies and their employees faced a bleak future.
One of the biggest issues, and it's always been a concern, is just the ore, and is it going to run out? This has been a concern for many years, and that's why the industry has really diversified.
Edward Wilson Davis, head of the University of Minnesota's Mines Experiment Station, was convinced the answer lay in taconite. First came the pilot plants, Pre-Tac, Pilotac, and Ixtaca. Then in 1951, Reserve developed a mine near Babbitt, connected by rail to a concentrator and pelletizing plant at Silver Bay. In 1952, Erie announced plans to build a plant near Aurora and rail line to Taconite Harbor.
I think we've shown throughout those years that we can pivot and we can make it work.
Today, what we're looking for is the next taconite.
I think we're probably embarking on a similar transition.
I mean, iron mining has been around since 1884, so 140 years, and it's made it through a lot of difficult times. And the DR project at Keetac is another example of this industry moving forward with technology and really staying ahead of the game.
What is DR? What is DR grade pellet? Well, DR grade is essentially a pellet that has less impurities, and in our case that impurity means silica. So essentially you have to liberate the silica out, and by liberating it out, you increase the iron content, and now that can be used in direct reduced iron. A few things that are pretty cool about our project is we're using state-of-the-art technology. Starts out with screening. We've got fine wet screening equipment, which is the highest capacity available. That's based off of improvements from existing technology. And one of the coolest is the high-intensity grinding mill. And this is something that uses less power to liberate the silica. And it's actually the first of its kind used in iron ore in North America. So pretty exciting to see that new technology.
The iron mining industry is so much more than just the mines themselves, although those are a very key part to the industry, but it really impacts other local businesses. It impacts our schools across Minnesota. The iron mining industry contributes money to every student in public education across the entire state. So its impact is vast and very massive, and it's important that these investments keep coming to the area, and thanks to our hardworking folks here, they're going to keep coming to the area.
And now
The next dimension is to have profitable steel solution for people and our most important customer, the planet.
Local mining companies take great pride in ensuring that we protect the environment. Our companies are working on decarbonization, sustainability, and these are all voluntary actions the companies are taking and have been taking for years. And protecting the environment is key to the work that we do. And that's important before, during, and after mining happens. One thing we saw was an electric shovel. There are a number of them at Mintac, and that's a way for the company to work toward that clean energy environment. I think the future is really bright. This industry has been around for nearly 140 years, but it keeps on moving and advancing and growing. And I think we're seeing that as we went from red ore to taconite. Now some operations are moving into DR grade pellets. So I think the future is bright, and there's a lot of life left for iron mining here on the Iron Range.
As noted in that story, iron mining has had to reinvent itself many times over the years, and to continue Minnesota's mining legacy, new products and greener mining techniques will be essential. The University of Minnesota Duluth's Natural Resources Research Institute is working on some of those potential mining innovations of the near future. Here to tell us more is Rolf Wieberg, Executive Director of the Natural Resources Research Institute. Welcome, Rolf. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Aaron.
It's fun to see that history of iron mining kind of whiz by our eyes here, but we're kind of at a crossroads, some new technology coming. What is the NRRI working on in the near future?
Well, to play off of some of the comments that are made, decarbonization and energy utilization and reduced impact is the focus of the federal government as well as our partners in the industry. We're excited because we're looking at all these opportunities, and our job is to look at what could be possible in the 5 to 10 year time frame. What are the things that are missing in our toolbox to allow that exciting future that Kristen alluded to? So we're excited because when we look at the way we think about our natural resources in Minnesota, they really are driving 3 really critical, what we feel are initiatives. One is ecosystem resilience, understanding the world we live in, understand our impacts and understand how to manage those impacts and prevent some if we can. Second is forest industries of the future. How do we understand those forests, what they're going to be tomorrow, and what those products of tomorrow might be, including engineered carbon products that will have a big impact on maybe our future steel industry. And of course, iron and minerals of the future. How do we do this with the resources we have today, the resources of tomorrow, and what are those technologies that are going to get us to those new products and that portfolio of value-added products that are going to bring more value to the state?
We were talking about direct reduced iron. Mm-hmm. That's one of the products that you're working on. What are some of those other products that you're developing?
Well, when we look at I'm going to back up just a little bit, because when we look at the iron, we steer around a lot of iron in the state today. We call it waste. We call it waste piles. We call it tailings. We call it oxidized ore. We're really trying to understand that resource so that we can create that new technology to bring those iron units to a useful
So these would be the mine dumps that we drive by on the highway.
Yeah, and some of the material we drive past when we are in their mining process. So there's a lot of iron there. It's just not what we can use in a taconite process. So we're looking at what are those technologies we can bring to bear to bring that to fruition first. As part of looking at those new technologies and new products, we've heard about DRG that was described in the video. DRI, which is a metallized form that can go into electric arc furnaces. Electric arc furnaces now make up over 2/3 of the steel making production here in the state, or in the country. And we need to be conversant with that, with our ores in Minnesota. As we go farther than DRI, you get into hot briquetted iron that are basically pure iron units and go directly into that, or into a blast furnace for that matter. But as you do that, the value of that product goes up. You have a broader portfolio, and we're excited about working with our partners to reduce their energy utilization, reduce their water utilization, and create that next portfolio of products.
In a world where the iron is so much higher grade than, say, a traditional taconite pellet, what's it going to take for the industry to scale up to all of that new technology?
And that's where we come in, working on that 5 and 10 year time frame, not next week. They've got that handled. But what we're trying to really deliver is what are those possibilities to demonstrate on an industrial level so we can reduce the risk so that they can invest. And then we're doing that not only with the industry, but we're collaborating quite closely with the Department of Energy, as well as the USGS. What are the resources? What are the technologies we need to take that leap? And how do we do that here in the state of Minnesota?
Do you think a direct reduced iron production plant is possible in northern Minnesota?
Absolutely. In fact, with the Department of Energy project that we're running right now, we're going to be building a world unique piece of equipment called a DRI simulator. Why is that important? Well, we can take any ore from anywhere in the world, probably in Minnesota, but we can emulate any DRI process that exists today or that could exist tomorrow. And what we're trying to do is look at how can we take these iron units, create a viable product out of those that can fit into different iron processes of the future that we don't know are there yet. So building these tools to give us the flexibility and the foresight to aid industry and give them a tool that they can use to build their plants, design their plants, and help them succeed.
And you're also researching ways to make mine waste more manageable. I know that's one of the big stories in mining is how are we handling the water waste. What are you working on there?
Well, NRI has been working on dealing with water waste, and in particular the sulfate issue in the state for many years now. And we have 4 separate platforms right now that we are in pilot stage, literally putting them on trailers and demonstrating these at water treatment facilities around the state. We have targeted 3 different areas of water contamination. One is the 0 to 200, which is a municipal water treatment plant. Their choice is to use reverse osmosis, which they can't afford. So we have a process that we can essentially plug in, and we've been able to demonstrate in 3 separate places in the state, being able to reduce it from the 70 to 120 parts per million to below 10 over a period of months. So this is exciting, and if we can go out there and demonstrate that with biological systems, but demonstrate with chemical systems and ion exchange systems, that's what we're all about.
Real quick,
sure.
As a scientist, what's the most exciting thing about the iron mining industry right now?
The opportunity.
Yeah.
The opportunity and learning to take those things we're walking away from today and turn them into opportunity.
Very good. Well, Rolf Wieberg, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Iron isn't the only mineral beneath our feet in northern Minnesota. Copper, nickel, and other sulfide minerals are abundant in our region as well. Producer Megan McGarvey and videographer Thomas Soderberg wanted to learn more about the potential of these minerals and what environmental concerns lay ahead for future excavation.
We're very comfortable with taconite mining, or iron ore mining. We've had it since 1880. We've seen the projects. We understand it as a general area. We get mining. We watch the ore ships. We know taconite came from the Iron Range. We know it grows up to be steel. But when it comes to copper nickel, this is a whole new industry for us. And to be frank, people are concerned about it. People have seen how copper nickel mining has been done other places. They have very legit concerns and questions about how we're going to mine it, what is our legacy going to be, some questions as to where do those materials go. And I think we all understand where those materials, what they grow up to be as far as renewable stuff like that, but people want to know, how is this going to be done? The big difference between the 2 types of mining is that if you have material remaining that has sulfide in it or contains sulfide, that sulfide can react with air and water to form sulfuric acid. So that is the big concern when people talk about sulfide ore mining that you don't have with oxide ores. If you look at the Anaconda mine, the Berkeley pit, and the big thing with that one is it was done with no planning, right? I believe it started in the late 1800s, and they just dug, and they didn't care, and then they let it flood, and that's the thing is that mining, we need to build trust. And it's hard because you're having to build trust for something you didn't break in the first place. I think one of the things I appreciate about Minnesota, when you look at where the copper nickel deposits are, we have the Boundary Waters watershed, Lake Superior watershed, and Upper Mississippi River watershed, which are 3 watersheds that people care a lot about. And I used to think, oh, why in the world would the universe put these metal resources next to these water resources? And I'm glad they did. I'm glad that's the way it is, because it's forcing us to be honest about what metals we use, where did they come from, how are they mined, who are they mined by, and what is good about these resources being here is it's forcing us to the table. Mining companies have not always been great. So I don't blame people when they go to some of these projects and they say, I don't want this next to the Boundary Waters. And I say, I don't either. This is not cool. This is not how we should have been mining, and we would never be okay with the Berkeley pit today. And it's taking those lessons from both the social and the environmental and saying, well, how do we keep this from happening? And ultimately it comes down to regulations, and it comes down to holding companies accountable. You know, we do have other areas of the world that mine, and how well those materials can get into the US, or how are they competing with us? We've seen that in the steel industry, as far as not non-American steel coming into our shores. And so as a copper nickel, we need to be aware of some of those competitors too. And that's one area that I think the Biden administration recently did the Inflation Reduction Act, which is very supportive of domestic mining and processing. And I think we need stuff like that to recognize that if it is a stamped American, it was mined differently than if it was mined somewhere else. Because at the end of the day, we do have stricter environmental standards. Many folks have heard of polymet, many folks have heard of twin metals at this point, but we also have Teck Resources with a deposit that's decent. And we also have Talon, and Talon Metals, a lot of people have talked about that. That's in Aiken County, which is an area that hasn't had mining before. But we also just have a lot of exploration going on in the state. And as we go forward, one of the predictions is that we will need to mine as much copper in the next 25 years as we've mined in the past 5,000 years. And that's just a lot of copper. And it needs to come from somewhere. The ethical, right thing to do is to evaluate that resource in Minnesota, to give it a fair evaluation and say, what will it take to bring those metals into the systems? What are the environmental things we need to consider? What are the social things we need to consider? We need to look at that because we know the demand for these metals is only going to go up as we electrify our world using different resources.
Will technology allow us to mine these new ores safely? Here with another viewpoint on copper nickel mining is JT Haynes, Northeastern Minnesota Director for the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. Welcome, JT. Thanks for being here. And congratulations on the success of your documentary, Hockeyland. You're one of the producers.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hockey is one part of northern Minnesota life, mining is another. What concerns do you have, given that we will need new electrical equipment for vehicles and other things in the green technology revolution? What are your concerns about the mining proposals here?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on. So first of all, it's great to hear these companies talk about interest in climate action. We support that. We all want climate action. It's also, I want to be clear that we all want economic development in northeastern Minnesota that is, respects the people on the Iron Range and also the people downstream of the Iron Range. I hope this is something we can all work on together. With regard to some of the recent, conversations around producing more copper and nickel and other metals for, the electrification process, there is a bit of a fact issue that we have to deal with here, which is, of course, that mining itself, and especially sulfide mining, is hugely impactful on the very resources that are currently under duress as a result of climate pressures. And of course, I'm talking about water pollution, talking about loss of biodiversity, and I'm also talking about climate pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. As we know, the industry as a whole, is responsible for up to 9% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So, these are all part of the context. We can't just be focusing on producing more things. If we only focus on producing more things, or if we only take an emissions focus, we are risking making the problem worse. And we need to be careful to address solutions that don't in themselves make the problem worse.
I think a lot of people who live in northern Minnesota look at mining as a jobs issue. What can you say about economic development outside of mining, or that would include some of these new technologies that didn't access some of these ores that they're talking about?
Well, we're very aware that there's an existing mining industry on the range, and there's 4,000 direct jobs as part of that, and a lot of indirect jobs. And we want to be clear that this is a different situation than the new proposals for sulfide mining. They're different in the sense that there are ongoing pollution issues with the taconite industry, and we heard Rolf talk a little bit about addressing some of those issues, the sulfate issues, et cetera, decarbonizing the steel industry. Those are really important things. We should be continuing to promote those ideas. Those are existing jobs. The sulfide mining industry, those are new proposals. Those jobs do not exist yet, and it is a more destructive and more polluting industry. So I think there's an opportunity here to focus on sustaining an existing industry and improving that industry as a way to come together in the region versus these very divisive international sulfide mining proposals, which suffer from tremendous flaws that have, after all these years, have yet to be resolved. So we want to continue to focus on those flaws and those issues, and also at the same time support better alternatives.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about your ideas here, a lot of what you're talking about is conservation. Mm-hmm. How does conservation roll into policy for northern Minnesota, that people who are used to the iron mining industry and the way things used to be, how does conservation roll into the future?
Well, we talk about needing copper, for example, for wind turbines, or we talk about the fact that there are metals in iPhones. And I think some conservation concepts we should be thinking about are how can we waste less? How can we conserve more? It's actually 65% less energy intensive to recycle copper than it is to produce new copper. It's 90% less greenhouse gas emissions intensive to recycle nickel than it is to produce new nickel. That's one thing. Another opportunity to look at is how can we conserve more of the resources that are already in existence, in other words, that have already been mined. And we're not doing a great job of recycling yet in the United States. Even small increases in recycling as compared to, for example, the EU would far outpace the production, for example, of a polymet mine. So what about looking at ways to have more producer responsibility across the lifespan of a product? Right now, it's pretty cheap to pollute and it's pretty cheap to waste. What if we looked at planned obsolescence in iPhones? What if we looked at the right to repair? What if we looked at extended warranties? Let's make products last longer. Let's make products last 25 years. One very direct and immediate way to reduce emissions and reduce waste is to increase things like public transportation. That has an immediate reduction in the need for new metals. In a way that it would be super productive for this conversation about how can we increase the supply.
Fundamentally, this is a show about natural resources. We talk about iron, we talk about copper, nickel, and other minerals. Mm-hmm. But what about water? What do you think the economic future of water is from your point of view?
Well, water is under serious stress. The scientists tell us this is not just an emissions crisis. It's certainly not just an electric vehicle crisis. This is a triple planetary crisis that includes pollution and clean water. It includes loss of biodiversity, and then it also includes climate. So when we think about water, here's an example. Not a lot of people know this, but the water appropriation for the polymet proposal, which has been, as we know, suspended due to major flaws with the proposal, the appropriation for that water permit is $8 per million gallons for 6 billion gallons a year. For some of the purest, cleanest water on the planet, for an industry that has one of the worst records of polluting water. So the question to your question is it smart to be putting all that water at risk? And not only just at risk, Polymet's own proposal says they will pollute that water and put it in the tailings basin indefinitely, and we're supposed to rely on future techniques to clean that up and reclaim it that have not even been determined yet. There's not even a timeline for it. So is it, in this current triple planetary crisis, is it responsible to put all that water at risk and also pollute it? And you know, we're very concerned about that, and I would suggest the answer is no.
So you're saying that to handle this crisis that you describe, we need to not only not mine, but that it's better that we don't mine.
What we need to do is we need to start with less wasteful, less harmful options. Like, we need to recycle more, we need to conserve more. Do we really need more products, more than we need clean water? Is it more carbon intensive to produce new metals or to conserve metals that we already have? And by the way, we can decarbonize the steel industry on the Iron Range. That's an option. That's an option to support jobs that exist right now. So I think there are options for us that we can work together on that don't just involve cracking open a new hole and creating all the consequences that entails.
Your organization talks a lot about jobs available in the green economy. What kind of jobs could northern Minnesotans look forward to in that world that your organization describes?
Well, we're not an economic development agency, of course. You know, our role is to look at the standards and enforce the standards in the law. But we do want to be supportive of economic development opportunities. And you know, something we've been thinking a lot about lately is, you know, what you've been discussing on this program, like how do we support the existing industry, which is taking efforts to increase renewable fuel usage, decrease the use of energy through things like DR pellets and electric arc furnaces. Can we decarbonize the existing industry to preserve those jobs and make it more globally competitive? I think that's the type of thing that maybe we could all get on board with together.
As an environmentalist, what excites you about what's happening in the mining industry? Is there anything, what's the good news coming out of it? Do you have any?
Yeah, sure, of course I do. Yeah, there's a lot of good people in the mining industry and a lot of good people on the range. I hold them very dear. And I you know, we may have disagreements on specific industrial proposals, but I think what we have in common is that people seem to appreciate the vision that, you know, this would be better if we were all working together, right? If we could find some commonality between the Iron Range and Duluth, you know, support some projects that respect people on the range and people downstream of the range. And by the way, we haven't mentioned this yet, but the Fond du Lac Band, the reservation which sits downstream of some of these proposals, you know, the scientists have said these proposals cannot meet the band's water quality standards. We got to figure out something else that takes into account the people who are downstream.
All right. Well, J.T. Haynes, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
All right. In the beginning, northern Minnesota iron mines operated with few environmental regulations. The first lawsuit over environmental damage was actually filed back in 1913. Now, this involved Wisconsin Steel, which operated the Hawkins mine in Nashwauk. They actually made International Harvester tractors with that ore. That mine's ore washing plant was on a nearby lake where they dumped tailings from the wash plant. Eventually, those tailings escaped the lake, flowing down a creek into Swan Lake, which on one bright, clear morning turned blood red, creating a big problem for the cabin owners around the lake. The lawsuit eventually failed because black and white photos couldn't prove that the lake had actually turned red. But the lawsuit did force the company to develop an early type of tailings basin. This same technology became an industry standard and is the reason taconite tailings aren't choking out our lakes and streams today. Our next guest is working on technologies that could make those same tailings ponds even safer, and he also knows a lot about green steel and how hydrogen could fuel that green mining revolution. Jeff Hansen is an environmental engineer by trade and one of the founders of Clearwater Biologic. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks for being here.
Well, Aaron, thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Yes.
Thanks for bringing me on.
I think I'd like to start talking about something I think is very exciting, which is the notion of hydrogen, a very simple element, being used in the production of steel. Can you tell me about that and how it works?
Well, maybe I can't tell you all about how it works, but I'm very excited about it as well, because hydrogen is a very powerful energy source, one of the best that we have on that, and it can be used to convert our iron oxide, which is your hematite, magnetite, taconite, etc., and remove the oxygen from it to make direct reduced iron. You have to have something powerful that wants that oxygen. Therefore, it can be a fundamental source of energy and reductive capacity to make reduced iron, meaning really metallic iron with, 97 or so % iron, which would make a big difference for what we have on the range here.
7 to 9% of the world's carbon emissions come from the steelmaking industry worldwide. So that's a huge chunk of the big picture. Would hydrogen produced steel help reduce that number?
Well, absolutely. Here on the Iron Range, we take our iron oxide, we ship it someplace else where it's processed in big blast furnaces. Our taconite pellets cannot be used in electric arc furnaces. But if they're reduced to direct reduced iron, they can be. And doing that with hydrogen versus coal or natural gas, you would have a greatly reduced carbon footprint reduction of those 7 to 9% of carbon that comes from the steel industry. And if we could be contributors in that here on the range where we have the ore, I think that would be a phenomenal contribution and a very big step in reducing greenhouse gases and help protect the environment.
I know we were talking earlier this week about the notion of iron-air batteries, and this is kind of another fascinating aspect of what we could potentially do in northern Minnesota. Very briefly, could you describe what those are?
Well, first off, to use renewable energy, wind and solar, you have to have a storage capacity. Well, an iron-air battery is one where you use iron to rust it or unrust it, oxidize or reduce it to be storing energy. Well, we happen to produce iron here, but it has to be, for an iron-air battery, it has to be an iron that can rust and unrust both ways, and it has to conduct electricity. After all, it's a battery, right? So our taconite pellets don't do that. DRI pellets do that. So Form Energy has been able to develop a system where they could have storage capacity sufficient for the grid to level out those ups and downs of renewable energies from wind and solar. And that could be great. We could produce those materials here.
One of the biggest problems that we hear about in the mining debate, both for iron mining and for copper nickel mining, is the problem of sulfates. Your company in particular has worked on mitigation efforts, and it's kind of fascinating because it's biological, the type of mitigation you've used. Describe how that works.
Well, first off, we know that sulfate in the water, mining impacted water, comes from the iron sulfide, the pyrite, the fool's gold, that is in very small quantities, but it's in taconite and other ores. And primarily when you stop mining, like the Erie Mining Company, and those mine pits fill up with water, then you have the water and the oxygen in the air, and it makes sulfate in the water. When that sulfate goes downstream, nature takes over, and it biologically converts sulfate to hydrogen sulfide. That rotten egg smell that none of us like very much, that is toxic to a lot of things and supposedly really damages wild rice. Well, our avenue on that is to use nature's way and biomimic it by floating bioreactors with huge surface area in a mine pit lake where we biologically reduce sulfate to hydrogen sulfide and then treat it. The next step of that is how to treat the hydrogen sulfide. And that's where I get very excited right now because of the direction that we're going on the Iron Range as a whole, because that gives us the opportunity to modify that system and deal with the sulfate issue in an extremely economical way now.
So direct reduced iron is actually the agent, is it not, to address how to handle that waste product?
Yes, as a matter of fact, when a few years back, the MPCA tried to come up with a new wild rice standard where they said, well, okay, you're going to produce sulfate, okay, but that goes downstream and nature makes hydrogen sulfide, okay, but if you got enough iron there, it will react with the iron and mitigate the problem. But is it the right kind of iron? How much do you have? Iron oxide, as in taconite, does not react with hydrogen sulfide hardly at all. But you take away the oxygen, that iron wants to react with something. It reacts with hydrogen sulfide. And therefore, you can take that sulfur totally out of the system at that point
So when we talk about sustainability, closed loops of natural production, you could be actually addressing some of the waste products from mining with some of the products that are mined here.
Absolutely, and that's one thing that I get really excited about right now. First off, excited because I see not only the potential, but that the industry here is going to greener steel and iron, reducing greenhouse gases. But then the product that they need to produce to do that can help us solve the sulfate problem at the same time. I think that's a big win-win.
Jeff Hansen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right. Although iron mining may be looking to reinvent itself once again with DR-grade pellets, copper-nickel mining operations are in their infancy in Minnesota. Some community members and environmentalists are worried about the impact those sulfide-rich ores may have on the environment. Producer Megan McGarvey and videographer Isaac Quick took a trip up the North Shore to hear a local's perspective.
People who experience the Boundary Waters often experience like a life-changing event. There are so few places where you can go in the world and go 15 minutes or more without hearing a human-made sound. I mean, imagine that, standing and not hearing a single human-made sound for an extended period of time. It's a dark sky sanctuary. You can see the Milky Way every night. I mean, that's just such a unique experience that we don't get to experience hardly ever anywhere else in our lives. And it's really life-changing for people. So the ability to access that and to experience that and have low barriers of entry to do that, that's a really special thing, and that doesn't exist everywhere. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness has even special protections above and beyond other wilderness areas in our country. It's the most visited wilderness area in the United States, which is cool. It's really accessible. It's easy for people to get in and out versus some wilderness areas, say in like Montana, where you have to be like a mountaineer to get in. You don't have to have a real specialized skill set for the Boundary Waters. But the extra protections are things like you can't have anything mechanized in there. That means even wheels, no portage wheels in the Boundary Waters, no sailboats, that kind of thing. There's also the airspace is protected. So that's why you never see planes or drones flying around in the Boundary Waters. Only the Forest Service can bring in their Beaver airplanes to do maintenance or emergency services. Sawbill is 100% dependent on the Boundary Waters. That's all we do at our business here. I mean, we don't do anything else. We don't have cabins, no lodge, nothing like that. So we are 100% a Boundary Waters business. And it's only through the great reputation and the good stewardship of this wilderness that our business continues to flourish. I feel very connected to the place up here, and it's really, I feel very lucky and very honored to be able to continue on our family's legacy of being small business owners up here. It's a lot of work, but it doesn't always feel like work, and I think every day how fortunate I am to be able to make a living here and create a living for employees and to create a childhood for my kids and to be a part of this community and a part of this landscape in a responsible way, and that's really important to me, and it's why I came back. So there's lots of different kinds of mining, right? And I think there's a long and rich history of iron ore mining in Minnesota. We're all pretty familiar with that. Everybody's grown up. We've had lots of employees, friends, and family that live on the Iron Range and are supported by that community, and that's great. The immediate concern right now, what everybody's talking about, is sulfide mining. I'm no scientist, but there are certainly folks out there who are experts, and so being aware of what sulfide mining is and the types of pollution that are possible from sulfide mining and how that can affect our ecosystem here in the Boundary Waters is really important. There are some really dire consequences of that mining, whether or not it even goes wrong, right? There doesn't have to be a big disaster, just the natural byproducts of that kind of mining can be incredibly harmful. And the companies that are proposing some of these mines they are not Minnesotan. They don't care about Minnesotans. They're not trying to hire union workers, they're Chilean companies. They're going to be bringing in folks from far away. None of that money is going to be staying in our communities. Businesses like ours, I am a third-generation business owner. I'm a fifth-generation local to this area. We are very invested in giving back to our communities. We donate to all the youth, T-ball leagues and that kind of thing. And we're here for the long haul, so small businesses like ours, the ma and pa resorts, that's the kind of stuff that's going to keep Minnesotans employed, keep us afloat, and take care and be stewards of our resources and our place here. Huge corporations from abroad, they don't care. They don't care about us. They don't care about what the pollution looks like. They can walk away from it, and that's that. So we're really focused on what can we do here to take care of our local communities and what kind of impact can we have, and that's really important to us. As the world moves on, new technology, there's different kinds of mining being proposed. And that's where it's really important for people to be thoughtful and discern different types of mining, different types of pollution, what might happen. And that's where we want to be thoughtful and careful about what we bring into the environment here in Minnesota. We've got such a rich ecosystem here in the Boundary Waters, so much water. Talk about resources. Water is a real precious resource, getting more precious by the year. So being careful as Minnesotans how we are stewards of that, as well as taking care of the people who live here and making sure that people can make a living wage and have good jobs. Those are all really important parts of the conversation that we're certainly interested in.
It's clear that mines in water-rich northern Minnesota must strike a delicate balance to preserve those natural resources. Here to talk about how new mines can do that is Julie Lucas, Executive Director of Mining Minnesota, which advocates on behalf of the proposed copper-nickel mines. Welcome, Julie. Welcome back. We saw you in the earlier segment.
Thank you.
So you heard her concerns.
Yep.
How would you address those concerns?
For one, I would just say thank you for sharing them. And just the fact that we're even having this discussion tonight is part of the reason why we should be happy these ores are located here. The fact that these ores are located in Minnesota allows us the opportunity to have people express concerns and to be able to have folks actually share those concerns in public forums and share them with the government officials who do the regulations, who do the actual regulating and environmental review, and to have conversations like this that the public can participate in and learn and hear opposing thoughts. That itself is a gift to us when it comes to our resources, and one that I don't think we should just blow off because it's not common throughout the world.
So when we look at these ore resources, setting aside some of the environmental concerns for now, I think one of the things that's interesting and potentially problematic is, when we talk about iron ore,
yep.
We've always sent iron ore out east, so to speak,
yes.
to Cleveland or Pittsburgh.
Yep.
And while the companies haven't always gotten along well with the locals, generally speaking, it was an understood supply chain, in the American industry. A lot of these new mines, looking at the ownership of mines like Polymet or Twin
Yep.
Metals, are international mining companies. And while they are well-established mining companies, they're not well known here, and they have kind of a checkered record around the world with things like labor or environmental practices in other parts of the world. How do we learn to trust, or how can we trust these kinds of foreign ownership models?
That's a tough one because I'm uncomfortable when we say foreign ownership because it's foreign investment, and as Americans we have companies that invest outside of the U.S. and so I'm trying to be careful on that because I'm glad people are recognizing the resource we have here, and as Americans we don't have a lot of companies within America that have done this type of mining to invest in this area. So these companies are coming here, and I think it's a great opportunity to bring a Minnesota flavor to what they do and to recognize just that opportunity. That's how I see it. Mm-hmm. But as far as, you talk about vertical integration kind of is, when you're talking about iron ore going to steel and so on and so forth, I would love to see that next step in our process be in America. Mm-hmm. I would love to see that those ores be processed further in America and those batteries be made in America, and all of that be made in America. Those are all going to require the exact same conversations that we're having about the mines, because that next process also will require environmental review, discussions of labor, things like that. So I hope that is our future, to have more of that made here, because we're the end users. We're the ones that are saying we want these products. So we should be saying, yes, let's dig it here, let's process it here, let's make these products, let's recycle that here. All of that should be done here where we are using those.
Looking at the 4 companies that were mentioned in the piece earlier, the 4 companies looking at copper nickel operations in northern Minnesota, one of them, Talon, has actually signed an agreement of sorts with the Tesla Motor Company, the automotive company. So that suggests that they would use the ore in electric vehicles. Where would the ore in these proposals go? What would it be used for, and what role would that have in our economy?
There's a wide range. Right now we talk a lot about climate change. We talk a lot about electric vehicles because they're shiny. Mm-hmm. But
they go vroom, vroom.
Let's not forget, nickel is critical to stainless steel. The vast majority of nickel right now is going into stainless steel. So it's going into, well, my wedding ring is stainless steel, but it's going into a lot of products that we regularly use. So we still need to feed that supply chain, but we also have, as we've previously mentioned, all the transmission lines. We talk about needing new car charging along our highways. That's all going to require those metals. All those batteries in those cars, all of that is going to require those metals. And it's not just about America. We sometimes put on our blinders and we think we're the only ones that want to move to renewables. But we have a lot of the world that needs to move to electrification to start with. So those metals worldwide aren't just going to feed Americans' desire for green energy. It's going to feed a world's desire, in some cases, just for energy to start with.
The iron mining industry has been around a long time in Minnesota, 140 some years. How long do you see, if successful, the copper nickel mining industry being around?
That deposit is massive. The Duluth complex, and it's not just the Duluth complex, so we have the mid-continent rift. So our continent literally tried to split itself apart, it's pulled itself apart, and then we have the intrusions that we talk about, which actually contain the copper and nickel. And so Tamarack, the Talon deposit, is not part of the Duluth complex. So we've already talked for years now about the Duluth complex and how significant that size is. Talon is a whole separate part that isn't part of the Duluth complex. So this is not insignificant. When you consider Minnesota and you look and say, oh my gosh, 2 billion years ago, we had the iron ore deposit laid down. And 1 billion years ago, we had the Duluth complex, mid-continent rift, and that deposit laid down. To have that abutting each other is amazing. For Minnesota to be part of this nation's past and our future with these 2 ore bodies, as a lifelong Minnesotan, I just think that's really cool that we get to be a part of that.
Very good. Well, Julie Lucas, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right.
Where were you born? Moravia. The date? June 5, 1873. Single or married? Is you not?
Oh, no.
Single. Where are you going? Wasabi, Minnesota.
Yo, to Minnesota.
That's all. Move along.
Stefan Douglas Biblicek didn't know any English. At first, he didn't realize what was going on.
Get back inside.
Hey, come back.
He told the interpreter he was young and strong, and he'd come to this country to work. He had a cousin in the iron mines of Minnesota. And if they'd only let him through the gate, he'd get there somehow and go immediately to work.
Rachitari umru. That's už ne mohu vratit. Je prijel do Ameriky pracovat. Jako můj bratranec Anton v Minnesotě. Teď už nemohu vratit. Rachitari umru. Jak su jenom pracovat.
I guess the immigration inspectors realized that with a man like my father, $25 more or less wouldn't make any difference. They figured that if he could take a chance on the United States, sight unseen, why, the United States could certainly take a chance on him.
Good luck. Go ahead.
Now all he had to do was get to Minnesota on 21 kroner.
That was an excerpt from the 1944 film An American Romance. Not on a lot of film lists, but it was filmed partly on the Mesabi Range, in fact, taking place right there in the Hull Rust mine pit near Hibbing, and very exciting. Joining us once again for some final thoughts on the future of mining in Minnesota is J.T. Haynes, Jeff Hansen, and Julie Lucas, our guests from earlier. And we wanted to end the program on just a kind of a discussion. And we talked about a lot of things today, but I'd just like, in a wrap-up here, what, for each of you, do you think is the greatest challenge facing northeastern Minnesota as it relates to the mining industry going forward? And we'll start with JT.
Well, the greatest challenge right now is preventing sulfide mining pollution. And with regard to the polymet mine, the greatest challenge, the proposal is, can it meet standards? And our position is absolutely it cannot meet standards. That's the reason it's been hung up for 15 years, and that's the reason it may never move forward. I'm sorry to have to be the one to say that. But it's proposed a pollution management scheme that has no evidence to back it up. It's proposed a upstream dam design construction technique that is discredited and been banned around the world. It has no end date. It has no term. These are problems that may not ever be resolved. So I think what we really need to be doing, the challenge for us, is to look for options that we can get behind together that will actually work.
Okay. Jeff, what about you?
Well, I think, polymet is one issue, but the mining that we do have here right now is taconite mining. And we know that blast furnaces pollute a lot. They're big dinosaurs, and they're on their way out. I hope our taconite industry is not on its way out with those blast furnaces. I get excited about the possibility of having new forms of iron that have positive environmental impacts, reduced greenhouse gas emissions that help the nation go green with our iron and steel. And if we can be a part of that while adding new good iron jobs here, taconite mining, I think that is extremely positive, and I get very excited about it.
Julie, what about you? What are the challenges facing northeastern Minnesota as it relates to the mining industry?
Well, I can't speak to the iron, but I will say for us in copper nickel, our biggest challenge will be educating folks as to how the mining industry has evolved and what we can do in the future, and why it's okay to be evaluating these projects in northern Minnesota, and why we can do it differently.
Great. So I want to kind of wrap on this final thought. We've talked about a lot of things. What most excites you about the future as it relates to our industry here, and what might be possible for northern Minnesota? And I guess, why don't we go the other way? How about
Spin
Julie?
back.
Yeah.
What most excites me is just the opportunity and the discussions that we're going to have. As I mentioned, this discussion brings us all to the table to talk about solutions and to talk about things like recycling that we haven't historically been great at discussing. I'm glad we're talking about recycling, because I've seen what it takes to bring that ore into a product, and we need to be respecting those products, and we need to keep those metals in circulation once they're there. And these discussions help us have those, more discussions about planned obsolescence. Thank you for bringing that up, and things like that. So I'm excited that we as Minnesotans can hopefully push this discussion forward for Americans to be having more.
Great. Jeff, what about you?
First off, I'd like to agree with a lot of these points about what excites, but I'd like to focus in on something very specific, and that with going greener on the steel and the iron in Minnesota, that does allow us to deal with the issue that we've had, and I've been working on for over 12 years now, which is the sulfate issue. And if we can solve that in the process of this, respecting the Native American tribes, who have been complaining about that for a long time, protect their wild rice in a better way, okay? Avoiding other downstream problems that sulfate is in this process, I think that's exciting. We do need to work together on issues and not just shout about it across the fence, but really work on solutions that do protect. And this is applied first off to the taconite industry. But sulfur in the taconite industry, is it any different than the sulfur in the sulfide mining industry? Not really. It's the same element. So we learn from our experience in the one operation that may be able to help some in the other mining that we don't have yet. I get excited about that prospect.
Very good. JT?
Well, part of the problem with sulfide mining is it does produce sulfuric acid, which leaches heavy metals into the water. But anyway, to answer your question, the thing I'm excited about, first and foremost, is the beautiful place we live. We have one of the greatest places on the planet. We have amazing forests and biodiversity and water and resources that we all enjoy. And I hear everyone talking about that. That is really exciting. I'm also excited that we seem to have some things in common here about things we can do to improve the industry right now, which is, can we address the sulfate issue that everyone agrees is a problem? Can we decarbonize the steel industry and move forward with a more sustainable, more robust, more competitive steel industry right here in Minnesota? Those things excite me, especially because it's an opportunity to work together on some things. Can we support some things together that brings everybody to the table? We got to bring the downstream folks to the table. We haven't been at the table for a while on some of these proposals, and I think that's part of the reason we've seen some of these divisions. We got to get everyone in there, and let's work on these things together.
Very good. Well, thank you all. Real quick, what's your favorite Iron Range food?
Really?
Yeah.
That's an easy one, pizza.
Okay.
Walleye.
Pasties for sure.
Okay, I'm with you on pasties.
Sunday, Iron Range Pasty Festival. I'm doing the shout out right now.
That's right, it is. That's right.
Ah.
So the Cornwall. I'm from the Browns are from Cornwall, so we've got pasty literally slowly clogging through my arteries as we speak. It's genetic. Okay. Thanks to our guests for sharing their time and expertise on our show tonight. If you missed any part of this program, you can watch it on our website, wdse.org. For producers Greg Grell and Megan McGarvey, I'm Aaron Brown. Good night.